everyone, and welcome. My name is Jody Lisberger. I'm the director of the Gender and Women's Studies program, and I'm especially honored and excited to have Dr. Leonore Tiefer here today for the annual Schweers Lecture on Women in Health. This annual lecture was established in 1981, and it was funded by Dr. Patricia M. Farnes in honor of Freddie Wild Schweers, a very gifted young woman who died of leukemia at the age of 16. 4 years later, Patricia Farnes, the pathologist who took care of Freddie, herself died of cancer. This annual lecture honors the courage and dedication of Freddie, Patricia Farnes, and Jeannie Wild, Freddie's mother, who's here with us tonight, and who was a prime mover in establishing supportive emotional health services for patients and their families at Hasbro's Children's Hospital. Tonight, it seems most fitting that Dr. Leonore Tiefer is the person to help us carry on this tradition of honoring such courage, intelligence, inspiration, and commitment to women's health. The many sponsors of tonight's lecture further attest to the commitment URI has towards the Gender and Women's Studies program and women's health. Let me thank the College of the Environment and Life Sciences, URI Health Services, the College of Human Science and Services, the College of Arts and Sciences, the College of Nursing, the Departments of Psychology, Political Science, Sociology, and Health, and Kappa Delta Pi. Thanks also to Debbie Began, Anna Vaquero, Erica Munoz, Pam Elizabeth, Tin Tierney, and Rachel Simon for their assistance. Let me now turn the microphone over to our esteemed graduate assistant, Anna Vaquero, to introduce Dr. Tiefer. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, everyone. So I recently read Dr. Tiefer's book, Sex is Not a Natural Act, and Other Essays for my Human Sexuality and Counseling graduate class. So let's face it, S-E-X might just be the most eye-catching word in the English language. So when you're reading a book titled Sex is Not a Natural Act, you invite a lot of questions, or at least a lot of raised eyebrows. Because if sex is not a natural act, what is it? As a feminist, scholar, activist, therapist, researcher, and educator, Leonore Tiefer asks us to consider how women's sexuality is anything but natural when it's constructed through a process of medicalization. Through this politicized framework, Tiefer argues, the social construction of sexuality in an economically driven system has the power to influence the ways women learn to construct ideas of normality versus deviance in our sexual experiences. Through the medicalization of sexuality, female sexual dysfunction and the selling of female sexual dysfunction easily becomes dichotomized, normalized, generalized, and then sensationalized. This process potentially leads to devastating consequences for women's bodies, as it impacts the diseases we are diagnosed with, the medicines we are willing to take, the treatments we are willing to undergo in order to correct what we are told is wrong with us. In a world of capitalism, privatization, and medicalization, we also have to question who might be given the power to define normal sexuality. If the experts on sexual functions and dysfunctions have ties to pharmaceutical companies with vested interests in capitalizing on common sexual difficulties, how are women in particular vulnerable to exploitation? With this in mind, Tiefer encourages us to challenge medical hegemony because, simply put, it's easier to dictate areas of disease and to prescribe medication than to recognize and address the complex, intersecting socio-political factors that play into female sexuality. Dr. Tiefer has said that when you put women at the center of scholarship, it changes the questions you ask, what you notice, and the conclusions you reach. As a feminist, a mother, a woman, a teacher, a student, a consumer, a patient, and a human being, I'm grateful to Dr. Tiefer for challenging us to ask these questions and for putting women at the center of a debate that is increasingly constructing our sexuality through a strictly medical lens. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Leonore Tiefer.
is not working.
I will talk a little bit while we fix the mic so you could get used to the Bronx accent. I brought it with me. It goes with me every place I go. Let me just start by thanking. Go ahead.
Let's see.
You like that better?
Well, you can sing now. Yeah.
Okay. So let me start by thanking the many contributors to tonight's talk. That was really, I mean, very heartwarming that if I had a sense that I had that much support, I wouldn't feel so all alone in this battle that I'm going to talk about tonight. But thanks very much to Jody for arranging this, and to all of the supporters really who made it possible. So let me go on to say, so the talk really is about, as you see, sexuality, but I just want to tie it to women's health, which is the purpose of the Schweers lecture. And to say that talking about women's health, one always must connect the topic, whatever the topic, to social context, to women's economic and political power, always to education and to the politics of knowledge. Politics of knowledge is something that we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. The idea that who is the expert is a crucial ingredient in how we evaluate what it is that's being said. And these things that social context, women's economic and political power, and so on, never truer than about sex, but it's not just about sex. So this does fit into the general theme. I just wanted to bring us up to date. You know about the governor of North Dakota, the governor of Alabama, the changes in abortion politics. Things are not going totally well in the larger social context for women's health. And so these are serious matters. And when I talk about activism and political involvement, you need to know that things are actually happening on the ground, even as we speak, and changes are happening that do not bode well for women's health. So this is what I want to cover tonight. I want to talk about the story of the new female sexual dysfunction. I want to start with a discussion of models, meanings, metaphors, then talk about medicalization, then marketing, and then changing this paradigm. So I want to talk about how this paradigm got established and then what we might be able to do to change it. So the first thing is really to start with what I think is the most important thing, which is very non-obvious, which is what kind of a thing is sexuality? This is a kind of linguistic question, but it's also an epistemological question. What kind of a thing is it? What is it like? What is the best model? What is the best metaphor? What do people need to know about sexuality in the 21st century? So here's a cartoon from 1998. That was the year that Viagra was approved. It was the year of the movie, the Titanic. So here's a cartoon, and what is the metaphor about sex in this cartoon? What kind of a thing is sex according to this cartoon? Another way to ask the question, what kind of a thing is the cartoonist telling us? Well, obviously, cartoonist is telling us that sex is romance for women and sex is erections for men. Not a very surprising analysis, and that's, I think, what makes the cartoon funny, because we all recognize the metaphor. But what we might not recognize is that it is a metaphor, and that the metaphor is not carved in stone, but rather a choice of many different ways to look at something. Here's another one. What's the metaphor about sex in this picture? This is a very widely shown picture in biomedical circles. It always gets the same kind of giggles when you put it up. So what's the metaphor? You know, men are simple, women are complicated. Again, something that actually a lot of people believe, as if it were something that could be demonstrated or proven, just like women like romance, men like erections. These are not things that are scientifically provable. These are claims, assertions. Here's another one. So here's genitalia. On the left, we have a photograph of a 19th century obstetric exam, how we deal with women's genitalia in the 19th century. On the right is an art exhibit that actually I organized with photographs of women's vulvas on the wall and everybody having wine and cheese and paying no attention whatsoever. So in the 19th century, what? Women's genitals are secret, sacred, hidden, powerful, dangerous. In the 21st century, women's genitals are just another thing on the wall. Something that men and women can have wine and cheese and not be upset about. All right, so how do you uncover the model, the metaphor? So let's just look at textbooks. What is the model of digestion in textbooks of digestion? What is the model of music and dance, cuisine, in textbooks of music and dance? And then what's the model in textbooks of sexuality? So you compare the types of topics, the illustrations, the emphases, the priorities. You compare what's in, what's out, what's left out, what's omitted, so on. So for example, these are two real books, Ballet for Dummies and Sex for Dummies. And so you look at what's in the book, Ballet for Dummies. Well, basically it's about how you do it. It's about all the different traditions of doing it. It's a cultural thing, whom you do it with, how you learn. It might even talk about who might be more talented or who's a better candidate for ballet. In Sex for Dummies, what do you talk about? You start with the anatomy and the physiology. You start with the bodily parts. Now, why don't you start with the bodily parts in Ballet for Dummies? You could. I mean, if you don't have the right kind of arch, if you don't have the right kind of hip joint, if you don't have the right kind of toes, you're not going to know what you're doing in ballet. You have to be aware of that, but they don't put it in the textbook. And in the textbook of sex, they don't start for sure with who you do it with, all the many traditions of doing it, historical differences, cultural variations, differences in talent, and these things are never mentioned. So the metaphor that comes across through the textbooks is absolutely crucial in communicating to the learner to death when it comes to sex, the dancing model, and the digestion model. So let's start with the digestion model on the right. This is what you'll see in the book of digestion, and it's often, I think, what you'll see in the book about sex. It's a built-in kind of a thing, evolved over millennia. You have problems with digestion. What are you supposed to do? Well, see a doctor, get tests, and the goal is to return to normal. You assume that digestion pretty much stays the same over lifetime. If it doesn't, it's a problem and you should get it fixed. You assume all people are the same, that the digestive processes of people in Alaska are the same as people in Mexico, is the same as people in Argentina, and the digestion is digestion, right? Why would it differ? And you have a sense that there is a line that can be drawn between healthy and unhealthy function, maybe slow and fast, so on, and that this line, the the same all over the world, over a lifetime, built in. That's the model. It doesn't emphasize culture, cuisine, or anything like that. The dancing model, I like because it's such a Bronx pronunciation. Dancing and coffee are the two giveaway words, you know, with the Bronx accent. So the dancing model is fundamentally, dancing is learned. It's a cultural thing. You have problems with dancing, what should you do? Well, take lessons. I mean, or observe how other people do it. Expect to grow and change in your capacity for dancing. Expect that if you have a new partner or a new situation, that your dancing will change. Assume that there are going to be wide variations due to the social variables of the situation, and that there are a range of alternatives and styles. They're all alternatives. They're not a line between healthy and unhealthy, right and wrong, good and bad. So the whole notion of the dancing, while again it has to do with evolution in the body, surely, it's not, it's a different metaphor, it's a different perspective. It's not the only perspective, it's the primary perspective that we use. Particularly the thing about problems. If you're having problems, the thing is to watch how other people do it and learn. That's like not exactly applied to sexual problems at the present time, but we might ask ourselves, why not? So models create frameworks and they have consequences. The consequences of a dancing model versus a digestion model of sex are enormous. Enormous. What kind of research would you do, right? Who are the experts? How do we educate children? How do we educate couples, seniors? What choices do people have for their sex lives? If you go back, you know, what about lessons? What about observing people? What about changing partners? What about expecting novelty? What about different styles? That's a completely different mentality than in terms of what we have now about education, choices, expectations, and the personal sexual scripts that people adopt. Completely different way of looking at it. Okay, so 2, medicalization. So 1 was models and metaphors. 2 is medicalization is a social process how the digestion model becomes dominant, hegemonic, primary, popular. Medicalization is a social process, this is Sociology 101, whereby behaviors, conditions, or habits are reframed as matters of health, diagnosis and treatment, and then they're swept up in the medical language, medical classification, authorities, and institutions. So a social process whereby behaviors, sexual behaviors, dancing behaviors, eating behaviors, whatever, become subsumed in a health and disorder model. Medicalization uses health language to assert what's normal. Normal could be anything, right? Normal could be what most people do, or normal could be what's healthy to do. Medicalization likes the language of health when it talks about normality. And then when it describes what's healthy, that is, what's normal, it goes to the biomedical language. Well, it's a brain thing. Well, it's a gene thing. Priority for biomedical research, health experts, and the result is a kind of marginalization, minimization, sidelining of learned and sociocultural perspectives. It's like learned and sociocultural things, like everybody knows that. I mean, what's really interesting is what's going on in the brain. Everybody knows that they make love differently in Brazil than in New York Or do they? Does everybody know that? I don't think everybody knows that, but you would say, well, yeah, of course it's different in different places, but what's really interesting is what's the same because it's in the brain. And that's the result of the medicalization of the discourse. What's interesting, I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then, of course, once the thing is medicalized, deviations are abnormal and need to be fixed. They're no longer square dancing versus waltz. They're now problems versus normal. So the consequences of medicalization for the social action are extremely intense. All right, what happened here? All right. So examples of medicalized behaviors, conditions, or habits. Again, behaviors, conditions, they can be anything. But did they get swept up in this normalizing, biomedicalizing framework? Moods. You can't be a moody person anymore. Trust me, I am a moody person. Mood is not good. Mood is like a deviation from normal. You're in a bad mood, you're in a manic mood, you're bipolar, your moods are out of control. Menopause, menstruation, sexual orientation, childbirth, attentiveness, learning problems, drunkenness. There's no drunkenness anymore, there's only alcoholism, there's only medicalized language. Kids' restlessness, ADD. Everything is governed by the idea that there is a right thing, it's evolutionarily determined, it's normal, and that makes it good. And some people like that. Some people, for example, in the sexual orientation history is that once sexual orientation got medicalized to be a genetic thing, and it's not a matter of choice, and it's not a matter of learning, opportunity, travel, but it's something that's totally built in. There was an enormous political consequence, and a lot of people feel the same thing happened for drunkenness or for gambling or for a lot of things that were considered moral deviations. Once it was decided that they're medical problems, the onus was taken away from them, and people felt this was a step in the right direction. But the consequences for who are the experts, what are the topics, what do we know something about, what don't we pay attention to, I think are very significant. Gee. Most of sex has been medicalized. So here's a cartoon, you know, it's a shame there isn't a pill to stimulate conversation. The idea is if we could only have a pill for everything, it would be great. But, you know, ejaculation or orgasm, there's a right one. And you don't want it to be too slow, you don't want it to be too fast or too infrequent. Sexual interest, you don't want it to be too high or too low. It begins to sound like the Three Bears, right? Choice of partner or activity. You know, there's normal and then there's abnormal. And sometimes choice of partner or activity blends into sexual repertoire. So the idea is, you know, it used to be you didn't have to know how to do everything. It used to be you didn't have to like everything. Now you have to know how to do everything. You have to like everything. So, or else it's considered a problem. What is the matter? You're inhibited. You're, you know, you have issues. Normal is somehow established that all activities and nothing is, you know, immoral anymore. These are just ways to have pleasure, ways to produce an orgasm, and you're supposed to like them all and be equally good at them all and so on. I mean, patently absurd, but that's in fact what is claimed. So how does medicalization happen? Well, reframing, it doesn't just happen by itself, right? Medicalization is promoted actively and indirectly. So the active promoters is the follow the money crowd. These are people like myself. Since I made a living doing sex therapy, I would certainly be in this list. people who make a living off of the medical model, people who make a living off of medicalization, people who either produce products or who produce diagnoses and work with them, or science or publishing, or the whole advertising business, or global clinical trials, or drugstores. There's a lot of that going on. That is a picture of my apartment building in Manhattan. I live on the 8th floor, it's First Avenue. It used to be a nice neighborhood. Now it's got a Walgreens on the first floor, half the size of the block, 2 blocks down from a Duane Reade, 2 blocks down from a CVS, and Rite Aid is right around the corner. There are drugstores every place. What does this even mean? Why are there drugstores every place? And what are they selling epistemologically, intellectually, conceptually? They're selling medicalization. They're selling a certain view of your body, of your life. There's also indirect promoters of medicalization. Groups that oppose drug advertising reform, you know, they say it's all free speech. So they're not pro-medicalization, but they're pro-free speech, and it just so happens that the only thing they like are drug ads. So, and then groups that oppose sex education, groups that oppose sex stores. They're all in favor of drugstores, but they're opposed to sex stores. Now, you can get lubes in sex stores, and you can get lubricants, in drugstores. The ones in the sex stores have nicer packaging, and they generally taste better. But the ones in the drugstores, you can run out and get at any hour of the day or night, certainly in my neighborhood. So, you know, zoning against sex stores promotes medicalization, because when you go into the Walgreens to get a lubricant, you don't go to the sex department. I can tell you go to the women's hygiene department or the old ladies department or something like that. Something that does not make you feel really sexy and erotic when you're buying the product. That's for sure. So they're selling a different way of looking at it. Lubricant, something you need because you're dry as a stick, and you know, as opposed to something that tastes nice and it's fun and it's a game, and they use it in Brazil, and you know. Censorship, evidence-based language that privileges certain kinds of research. Obama and his new brain mania. So Obama's brain initiative, I have to say I'm putting on the bad side of sex, because it's just like the gene thing, you know, it's just going to be more of the wrong kind of research, not really going to help my sex life in any way that I can predict. Zoning control of sex business is very interesting. But all the sexual purity movement, these are people who are against sex education and so on. So this is the indirect promotion of medicalization, which I think is as important as the follow the money people. But it takes more than just promoters, right? It takes a receptive audience. That's you and me. So why do people find medicalization so attractive? So the first answer is it's the zeitgeist. I've been ridiculing the zeitgeist so far, you know, the biomania, hormonomania, genomania, brainomania. So here's an illustration of that, right? Testosterone jokes that really make it sound like testosterone is an immensely effective and powerful agent, that you wouldn't want to fool around with because it's so powerful. Contributes to a sense, you know, that that's what we're really talking about here, hormones. So the zeitgeist of biomania, then the fantasy of simple, quick, expert, definitive solutions. Wouldn't that be nice? You have a problem, and so what do you want for your problem? You want something that's going to work right away, and work all the time. right? So that's medicalization. Sounds much better than psychoanalysis. Side effects and harms informations are marginalized. Well, that's because most of what we know that's medicalized is limited information, misinformation. The focus on function reduces embarrassing sex talk for healthcare workers, patients, and media. So if you can talk about function, you can have kind of clean talk. You know, you don't have to talk about fantasy. You don't have to talk about longing. You don't have to talk about what you really like and why you like it, what it means to you. You don't even have to think about why you like what you like and what it means to you. You don't even have to know why you like what you like and what it means to you. You just have to know that the hip bone is connected to the ankle bone, right? And somehow then you know about sex. So the focus on function reduces embarrassing sex talk. And I've worked in medical centers now for 25, 30 years, and I can tell you that doctors are not comfortable talking intimately about sexuality, that they get no training in that, and they like to stick on the functional side, certainly when they're talking to their patients. So, and the media are not going to write dirty stuff. You can't write dirty stuff. You can only write about cells and hormones and HIV, vector of disease, and so on. So medicalization, it also fits with a familiar moralistic view. You know, the right and wrong, good and bad, shifts very easily into healthy and unhealthy. That was sort of the original insight of Peter Conrad when he was writing about the medicalization of society in sociology. Started with the bad becomes sick. Right? It's exactly the same categories of behaviors, the drunkenness, the gambling, and so on, but now that they are conditions, medical conditions, we can deal with them. This was a great paper. You know, everybody's citing this paper, sending me this wonderful paper that showed that pleasure was real because it was in the brain. That the clitoris actually mapped into the brain, the cervix and the vagina. They had their little areas in the brain. Well, of course they had their little areas in the brain. I mean, where else were they going to have their little areas? But so what? I mean, what exactly is the implication of this? What difference is it going to make? It's not going to make any difference in the short run, and I don't think it's going to make any difference in the long run. This is a great advantage of being an older scholar. I see all of these technologies. Every time one of these technologies comes on, oh, it's going to have the answers. It's going to provide new information, new solutions. Everybody gets real excited. Tens of billions of dollars go into it. And, you know, a few things come out. And then we move on to the next one. Brain mapping. No, we still don't have any genomic treatments that are going to be useful except for extremely rare diseases. Now, are we going to see them? Well, everybody says we will. Of course, they've been saying that for now 20 years. And I expect they'll be saying it for 40 years and 60 years before, if ever, we see any real results. Meanwhile, huge resources are pumped into that. Every university has a neuroscience building. There seems to be endless money for neuroscience, right? But I don't see the same amount of money going into the study of actual cultural, social variations in pleasure and learning, talent, sexual talent. Why is there no research on sexual talent? Anyone who has had more than one sexual partner in their life knows there are differences in talent. We can't even talk about that, right? The illusion, this evolutionary language implying that the whole thing is very democratic. Everybody is equal. Everybody is the same. It's not true. Everybody is not the same at anything. Why would they be the same at sex? Why would they be the same in terms of wanting it or liking it or knowing what they're doing or prioritizing it? But you have to now. You have to prioritize it. You have to like it. And sorry. So why do people find it so attractive? So the current atmosphere of personal responsibility for everything, neoliberalism, whatever you want to call this, for health, employment, education. If you don't save for your retirement, you know, you're going to be living on the street. So this kind of atmosphere creates a lot of tension and a desire to control things. And medicalization, because of this illusion that it's simple, it's quick, it'll fix it, and so on, science, they know what they're doing, it helps restore a sense of control by reducing the shame, the blame. It's not my fault. It's not hopeless. And of course, it avoids conflict because, honey, it's not your fault. It's just the hormones. It's not that you don't know what you're doing. It's not that you can't talk about it. It's not that we can't read a book together. It's not that we can't go to somebody who'll teach us something. No, no. It's the hormones. Let me go down to Walgreens and get some of that lube. The mantra of medicalization, it's not all in your head. See, this is so ironic. It's in your brain, but it's not in your head. I don't quite get that. But it's not all in your head. You're going to see that every place. The implication that it's not all in your head means that it's real and it's not your fault, but you do need to see a doctor. And that's true for so many things. And all of these new books, it's not all in your head, it's not all in your head, it's not all in your head. So it's not all in your head. In 1988 was actually the headline in this Time magazine article by a urologist from Boston named Irwin Goldstein. And in this article, or see the subhead, new therapies keep impotence from being a hopeless condition. That's the knife twist. That's the thing. Something has happened to the public confidence in learning, in psychology, in improvement through practice. Somehow, none of these things is supposed to work anymore. It's all hopeless. The only hope is biology. The only hope is medicine. The only hope are genes and hormones and neuroscience. Somehow, somewhere along the way, and you know, topic for greater discussion at greater length, the public lost its confidence, and again, I would say it was promoted actively and indirectly, but the public lost its confidence in non-medical solutions to things, and then became gullible, vulnerable to being sold endless medical solutions, none of which really quite works, but the next one is going to work well, and then next, and the next, and so on. But it was that loss of faith somewhere along the line. So I would say that urologists played a really big role in the 1980s in this. I was working in the Department of Urology at Beth Israel Medical Center from 1983 to 88, and then I went to the Department of Urology at Montefiore Medical Center from 88 to 96. So for all of those years, I watched urologists move into the field of sexuality. It was a very simple reason. They lost several other major areas of practice. They lost kidney stone surgery to the lithotripsy machine. You know, sound waves break up the kidney stones. You don't need open surgery anymore. They lost benign prostate surgery to drugs, shrink the prostate. You don't need to have benign prostate surgery anymore. So they needed new areas, and because sex was beginning to be legitimate as an area of study, all these urologists moved in. And back to women, which I haven't mentioned for the last 3 hours, the same guy, Irwin Goldstein in Boston, who had been in this Time article about how impotence was not hopeless, because all of these new treatments were coming in. Of course, in 1988, let me say, in 1988, which was 10 years before Viagra, what exactly did Irwin have to offer? Men with erectile problems. He had surgeries, and he had roots, yohimbine. He used to give yohimbine, which was some kind of bark of an Amazon tree. They had a lot of roots. I mean, it was practically medieval. So they had surgeries, they had all sorts of experimental things. They had injections into the penis. You have not really lived until you have talked to a man with a needle phobia who wants to have an erection so badly that he is going to overcome his needle phobia and inject himself into the penis. That's courage. So they had injections, they had surgeries. Basically, they had nothing. And when they said impotence, a hopeless condition, we were treating people with impotence right and left. I was treating people all the time with impotence through education, more education, psychoeducation, little clinical stuff here and there, but a lot of education. Just talking about sex was like revolutionary for a lot of people and helped them so much. Okay, so in 1997, the guy starts talking about female sexual dysfunction, a previously unknown epidemic. So in 1999, there were two events that I would signal as really creating female sexual dysfunction, which is not to say that women didn't have problems with sex. I think 100% of women have problems with sex. I think 110% of women have problems with sex. How could you not have problems with sex growing up in a society like we live in, with no learning, no teaching, no coaching, no sex education, no models, no practice, no self-confidence? Endless shaving of your pubic hair is a major contribution to sexuality. I mean, what kind of a culture is this? So in 1999, these two events that I would signal, one was this paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association, which summarized a sociology work from the 1990s, almost 8 years before, that had been about sociology. You know what sociologists are interested in when it comes to sex? How many partners, and were they the same religion, and did you meet them in your neighborhood, and did you get married, and do you live together, and you know, those kind of variables. They had one question in this sociology book about health, one question, which had lain dormant lo these many years because sociologists weren't really interested in sexual health. But the question, you know, have you had any problems in the last 12 months? Check off what kind of problems you might have had. Well, 1999, a year after Viagra is approved, money, unlimited money for reanalyzing research, these three guys, paid by Pfizer, the manufacturer of Viagra, reanalyzed that one question in that book and came up with a statistic that 43% of American women had sexual dysfunction. And that, my friends, was game over. 43%, well, 43% already. It's a serious epidemic. It's something we need to do something about. It's something half the women in this room have sexual dysfunction. The other thing that happened was Irwin, up at Boston University School of Medicine, decided that what female sexual dysfunction needed, and remember medicalization, it's in stages, has to get institutionalized. We need a journal, we need an organization, we need funding, we need legitimacy, we need credibility, we need departments. He wanted to be the father of female sexual dysfunction. That's how I felt. That's exactly how I felt. Irwin, are you serious? I said, female sexual dysfunction really doesn't need a father or a mother or anything else. But, you know, this is how it works, and this is how everything works. I mean, this is just a model for how fields get started. You know, and I'm giving this a very, you know, kind of cynical perspective. But the people who followed Irwin were not really cynical. Some of them were kind of in it for the money, because they didn't have the surgery to do anymore. They needed new jobs. They needed credibility. Sex has always been kind of a marginal thing. People who teach sex are a little marginal, right? People who research sex are a little marginal. There's no department of sexuality studies at this institution or pretty much any other institution in the entire country, even though people are dying to major in sexuality studies, right? We've got some queer studies here and there and a few LGBT studies here and there, but there is no department, interdisciplinary department in sexuality studies where we'll have the lawyer sit down with the anthropologist, sit down with the historian. I used to have dreams about those lunches and seminars that I would get to participate in. And we'd all be studying sexuality. It would be so fascinating. No, because it's so political. There's no president of no university who has the confidence to establish a department of sexuality studies, because people will get upset. Now, you know, things are changing, but still not fast enough. So Irwin created a space in medicine, not sexual medicine. I mean, we're already, like, we're 20 years into the HIV epidemic. We've got all kinds of people studying infectious diseases, STDs. We got a lot of people studying rape. We got a lot of people studying sexual development and things. But he saw this area in sexual medicine that he was going to call female sexual dysfunction. So how did it come about? So I would say this is how I think it came about. Again, these are not all the factors, but there's a general sexualization of culture. Doesn't have to, it's not Irwin's fault or to Irwin's credit that you have a sexualization of culture. It's about, we live in a consumerist society. Women have equal rights, more or less, sometimes. We have the liberalization of censorship laws. You know, things changed a lot in the 70s so that you could now talk about things in the newspaper, talk about things on television and radio, publish things. You couldn't do that before. It was illegal. So there were legal changes, there are economic changes, there are social and gender changes, huge technological changes. The fact that people could watch pornographic videos in their privacy of their own homes in the 80s. This is long before the internet. I mean, the internet has put everything on the super fast track. But in the 80s, there was just this enormous increase in sexual curiosity because there was all of this stuff available now where you could watch all kinds of sexual things, and people were just fascinated. So at the same time as the sexualization of culture, we have this kind of rhetoric that sexual equality, the equality of men and women, means that we're the same. And so in the DSM, we would have these classifications. Men have sexual dysfunctions, women have sexual dysfunctions. And then when Viagra was approved in 1998, right away people started saying, and where's the Viagra for women? Because the notion is that if men have something, women should have it too, that's this notion that that's what equality is. Not to mention, no one had asked for a pill for women, but Irwin and others saw the opportunity, and of course Pfizer and these companies saw the opportunity as well. So the rhetoric, I think, that sexual equality means the sameness is crucial. Then there's this vacuum of sex education and sex coaching, right? Sex teachers. There's no sex teachers on every corner where you can go learn some things. I mean, even the thought is like weird, right? Going to a stranger to learn how to give and receive physical pleasure. I mean, that's not what sex is all about. Sex is that thing that you do with somebody you care about, even though neither of you knows what you're doing. So, and the medicalization trend. So the fact that The culture is getting sexualized, but people are not really knowledgeable, and they don't have the vocabulary, they don't have the experience to talk about these things. So again, it's another way to look at it. Sexual ignorance, the myth that sex is natural, that's the metaphor, right? That's the digestion metaphor. That it's just there, when you need it, it'll be there. Nobody taught you how to digest. But is sex that same kind of a thing? Inadequate sex education, no honest sex conversation. The way that people lie about sex changes over the decades. That, I think, also is an under-researched topic. People used to brag more, now they complain more. But the real honest reflections are still wanted. Then sex as a symbol. So if you're really sexy, then it means you're mentally healthy, and celebrities are emphasized. The only thing we care about is how sexy they are and what their sex life is like. And the performance expectations is growing. And then there are all these products and services. Naturally, if there's insecurity, because expectations are growing and expectations are not met by preparation, it leaves a gap for products. That's marketing 101. Find a need or create a need. But if it's an ignorant situation and yet the thing is important, there are going to be a lot of products. Deodorants, depilatories, brassieres, everything. Your body is not all right. Your body is not sexually adequate. You don't smell good, you don't look good, you don't feel good. Fix it. Fix it. And then the emphasis on sex negativity in the culture. So, marketing. So, for the past 15 years, it's been a new ballgame since Viagra was approved in 1998. We could talk a lot about that, but just briefly, old-style marketing, as in the Viagra salesman, Love and Other Drugs, based on a real book by a real Viagra salesman, which is really fascinating to read, is sales. You know, and the salesman's personality, like Willy Loman, that kind of thing, door to door, brand names, ads, trademarks, you know, building a loyal customer base. That's old style marketing. New style marketing is creating the market by creating the condition that requires the product. This is not what the vacuum cleaner salesman did. He didn't create dirt. He went out and there fixed dirt. But now they're creating dirt. Disease awareness campaigns, medical education that's industry controlled, drug trials that are industry controlled, and so on. This is a sign that was in Reagan Airport that caught my eye. Real men, real depression. That's a disease awareness campaign. That's a hallmark. Making the family a friendly face on a medical condition. So soon after Viagra was approved, I think it's important to think about the idea that a pink Viagra was branded, became a brand, right? So that even when Pfizer gave up testing Viagra on women because they couldn't get it to work, didn't matter. Everybody kept looking for the hunt for the pink Viagra. And everybody still looks for the pink Viagra. I think that's so amazing, even though Viagra itself, but Viagra became a brand. It became an iconic term, meaning sexual salvation, meaning, you know, quick, easy, simple. Of course, the research doesn't really support that. Viagra is not as effective as one might think from the advertisements. You don't see that half of the guys in the advertisements it doesn't work for. What kind of an advertisement would that be, right? Everybody it works for. Everybody loves it. About half the people who try it don't like it, don't continue it, don't refill their prescriptions, have side effects that are intolerable, and so on. Oh, okay. So then new drugs for female sexual dysfunction and pre-approval marketing, new websites, social media. You know who that is? Lisa Rinna, this soap opera star. She became the friendly face of female sexual dysfunction in the disease awareness campaign. Because there was no drug. They couldn't sell a drug, but they sold the disease. She went on TV coast to coast to talk about how she and her incredibly sexy hunk husband had actually had female sexual dysfunction. And it practically tore their life apart. You fill in the rest. And then the most recent one, and I do want you to go look up this website, Your Voice, Your Wish, sponsored by Irwin's group, which morphed into the International Society for Women's Sexual Health. That's what it's called now. He now has this petition, as of last month, about what is my wish, and basically my wish is more drugs. And you should sign the petition, and what will they use the signatures for? As we continue to work for the further development of the field of, and advocate for solutions. Those are the wishes. I mean, if I had a genie come out of a bottle with 3 wishes for female sexuality, they would not be the 3 wishes for more drugs, more treatments. You know, they would be something a little bit more about education and social opportunities. Okay, so finally, let me just describe in my last 10 minutes this campaign that I started in right after Viagra was approved. This is the website. It was to be both an intellectual thing and an activist thing. We've done a lot. We've had a lot of fun. Those are some of the things we've done. So just to say, in 1999, how do you start something? I mean, one of the reasons I like to come around and give talks is people say, oh, look how much you've accomplished. How did you get started? We got started by sitting down and writing something and sending it to a newspaper. Then we went to Irwin's meeting. See in the upper right-hand corner, Irwin's meeting. I wasn't going to go to that meeting. I thought, a meeting about female sexual dysfunction, what a horrible idea. Nobody will go. And then I began hearing that everyone was going. This is something that really requires unpacking. Why was everyone going? I won't go down that road, but it's, you know, people are gullible, are attracted, are frustrated in what they're doing, and they see opportunities, and before you know it, you're involved in something and you don't even know what it's all about. So we went, we wrote some things, we handed them out, we talked to a journalist, we got an article in the Boston Globe the first day of Irwin's meeting. We were nobody. We weren't even a we. We were just a bunch of women sitting around. What else is feminism? A bunch of women sitting around saying there's a problem here. Doubts heard over sexual dysfunction gathering. I was so thrilled by that headline. That's all you need, doubts. Doubts is just enough to puncture the illusion of essentialism, obviousness, perfection, progress, doubts. All right, now people might have thought, well, the doubts are by lunatics, so we don't have to pay attention to them. But enough people thought, well, they wouldn't be in the Boston Globe if they were lunatics. So then we got together and we wrote a manifesto. That was the biggest word I could think of, a manifesto. And how do you write a manifesto? You put paper on the wall, you have a lot of coffee and sandwiches, you sit around, and you talk, and you talk, and you think, and you talk, and you practice what you want. So we wrote a manifesto. It's on the website. It's been translated into 1 million languages. And we did a lot of stuff, books and training manuals, conferences. We went to the FDA, talk all over the world. And then we decided to get involved in female genital cosmetic surgery. There should be a picture there, but what happened there? Oh, look at that. Huh. Wow. Okay. So it's the same contextual analysis. as for female sexual dysfunction. Negative background, lack of knowledge, normalization of the medical thing, normalization of pornography. I just mean everybody has it, everybody's seen it. People don't know that there's a lot of graphic art manipulation of the labia in pornography. People think, oh, well, you know, everybody's looking at the pornography and they see that women don't have, that women have certain kinds of labia, and that's why they want those kinds of labia. They don't realize that the women don't have those kinds of labia, that it's manipulated through graphic arts, and that video will show you a story about that. And then the whole pubic hair removal, so the labia are right up front and right out there, and then thongs and bikinis and oral sex. Tremendous contribution to self-consciousness about the labia from oral sex. Now, oral sex is just a thing. It's not good, it's not bad, it's not necessary, it's not unnecessary, it's just a thing. But the fact that there's more of it, and people don't know what they're doing, and they're uncomfortable, and blah, blah, so they make remarks. And people are very self-conscious, and they're into guilt and blame and shame. The Body Project, as it's called, self-surveillance, self-improvement. There's always something wrong, something you can do to fix yourself. And it's not really about learning, right? It's about changing your body. That's what the Body Project is about. So, you know, every day on the Groupons, I'm getting bikini waxes endlessly. This is, you know, supporting the huge industry in New York is bikini waxes. On the right is a screenshot I took from that video that shows how the computer graphics modify the labia in women's genitalia and pornography. You have to look at that. It's totally fascinating. And these are before and after pictures from genital cosmetic surgeons. So we saw in Europe and Australia and the Pacific Rim, all different kinds of ways to kind of celebrate the vulva and celebrate vulva diversity. Endless. There's one from Hawaii, London, Sydney, and so on. And Rachel Lieber, who's a graduate student at City University of New York, this was her idea. She's from New Zealand. Did you know that New Zealand passed gay marriage today? All right. Way to go, New Zealand. So Rachel started this international vulva knitting circle. And, you know, she said every time women get together and they're knitting vulvas and they're laughing and they're talking about their bodies and they're talking about sex. That's what it is. We called it consciousness raising back in the day. Goes on. In 2009, we had this 2-day gallery event in Brooklyn. That was with the wine and cheese. We had pictures, photographs, sculptures, all kinds of stuff. In 2010, we went down to the FDA for another one of these drug hearings. We had an online petition. We unrolled all the names from the end. So it was the first time there'd ever been a kind of theater event at an FDA hearing. Then in 2011 was a documentary, which I hope many of you had a chance to see. It's online. It's on Netflix, but there's a really good educators thing if you want to see it, Orgasm Inc. And it followed us around for a number of years. And it's an incredible story about the drugs and the race for the pink Viagra. Very interesting. And then in 2010, there was a book about the New View. And then we had this thing called flash activism. Again, we're sitting around my living room, drinking endless coffee. What can we do? What can we do? We thought of this thing we called flash activism. So we sent out an alert to everybody we could think of saying, go to the genital cosmetic surgeon in your neighborhood, in your town, in your region. You can find them online. They're every place. And take a photograph of yourself in front of their office sign, holding up a protest sign, and send that to us and we'll upload it. And it got a lot of people involved. And people went out in groups and they went out in individuals. You know, vulvas are beautiful, no two alike, and chanting and all kinds of stuff. Then we made what is one of the world's greatest YouTubes, a spoof infomercial. A spoof infomercial called Dr. Vijay's Privatize Those Privates, where we hired an actor, we wrote a script. It took a long time, but it's really great. It's 9 minutes long. And he tells you how to start a business. If you know your medical practice isn't doing so well, really you might want to go into female genital cosmetic surgery. It's a growing area. And he explains how to get involved and the principles that we had him articulate, that we wrote in this script, deconstruct the entire situation. It's absolutely hilarious and was a lot of fun. Then we had another conference. You show Orgasm Inc., you show the videos, you know, you sort of recycle your material. So then finally, this is the last thing I want to show, 2013 is, you know, you can only keep doing the same thing endlessly for just so long. Like after a while, the story of the drugs, it just got so repetitious, even though, you know, we defeated all the drugs that came up to the FDA, okay, fine, but there's more in the pipeline, more and more and more. It's just a matter of time. We certainly have not defeated the notion of the pink Viagra or female sexual dysfunction. But, you know, we did as much as we, so then we got into the genital cosmetic surgery. Same arguments, same feminist backdrop. But again, you can only do just so much before you get bored. Then we decided to go for the larger landscape. Selling sickness, not just when it comes to female sexual dysfunction, but the whole landscape. And so we organized a really marvelous conference that we held in February, myself and Kim Witzak. Kim is on the left there. And Kim is a regular person, right? She's not a feminist, screaming, activist person, professor like me. She's a regular person. She actually works in an advertising agency. But her husband committed suicide 2 weeks after going on Zoloft because he was misprescribed, and when he started getting side effects, his doctor just told him to increase the dose, and the whole thing was like a cascade of tragedy. And she's not the only one. So but she's the sort of person who, I mean, of course she was traumatized. Of course it was like the worst thing that ever happened to her in her life. This was in 2003. But she decided she was going to do something about this and learn something about this. How could this happen? How could there be a drug out there that takes a perfectly healthy person who's never depressed a day in his life, and the drug drives him crazy and he hangs himself in the garage? How could this possibly happen? So she became a consumer advocate and has worked for years in consumer organizations doing the same things. Street protests, petitions, online stuff, conferences, same stuff, all within consumer union from a consumer point of view. And she and I decided that we would make a partnership, that we would try to do something about selling sickness from a professional consumer partnership point of view. So that's sort of the newest thing. That's our website. The idea is that medicalization and disease mongering are all over the place. FSD is just one example. And that resistance requires working in coalitions, and it requires an alternative view. You can't just say, I hate this. You can't just say, I don't like this. You have to have another point of view. And that's why I think the disease dancing stuff is, you know, essential. That's why being the professor is useful. It's not just about complaining about things. It's about having another point of view. So that's what Marion Henley offered in Ms. Magazine in 1999 with her idea of Viagra supplements. Revives flagging interest, rekindles a passionate drive to remember birthdays, stimulates the urge to give compliments, enhances the most basic act of all. These are the supplements, right, for Viagra, and basically these are the learned cultural things. So I hope I didn't go on too long, and I'm eager to hear your questions, and again, thank you so much for this opportunity.
There's a table back there.
Okay, there's a table in the back, and if you would just give us your email, we'll put you on the mailing list for future events.
So, are there any questions?
So, are there any questions? Or there are questions. Who has the first question? Yes.
Okay. I'm not.
There are questions.
Please don't go if you want to hear questions and answers.
Yes, please.
Thanks for your marvelous talk. It's been really great. I really enjoyed it. I'm not an expert in this field.
Yes.
I mean, this is very informative. I'm just curious about your, it sounds like you do not agree there is a thing called female sexual dysfunction.
Right.
And what I sensed was that you think it's more like a social problem than a biological or physical problem. Do you agree, or how do you interpret that?
So when you say it is more, what is the it is the question. Women have complaints. They're not, I don't like it. It hurts. I don't want it. Crazy things go through my head. I get cramps in my leg. I only want to do it with the wrong partner who, is not the one I'm married to. I don't like being touched. I don't want to be nude. I mean, people have endless complaints, many times more than one. So are those dysfunctions? The basic notion of dysfunction has to be contrasted with a normal idea. Sexual dysfunction contrasted with sexual function. And what is normal sexual function? My main point, I think, would be that there is no such thing as normal sexual function. There are many ways to give and receive pleasure with your body. There are many ways now to make babies with your body. There are many ways to be intimate with your body. There are many ways to be intimate that use your body a little bit, but mostly are about poetry. There are many ways that you could be a little intimate with your body, but a lot of it has to do with, cooking or dancing or holding hands in the park. What's sex? There actually is no such thing as sex, right? If you try to define sex, you won't be able to. I mean, there's gender, there's male, female, and even that, is sort of more on a continuum. There's reproduction, there's the reproductive organs. What's a sexual organ? Is the shoulder a sexual organ? There are some people for whom it is. The ears. What people don't understand is that sexuality is about eroticization of the body. It's a process whereby the body acquires a certain capacity for excitement, intense experience, feeling. Everybody has capacities, and none of us can use all of our capacities. There's only 24 hours in a day. People learn some capacities, and then they may forget them and relearn them with someone else, or they may meet someone else and a whole new set of capacities are learned. Most people have this idea that sex is intercourse, a little foreplay, a little penile-vaginal stimulation, and an orgasm. And that's like what sex is. That's so not the whole landscape. But the idea is if you're going to sell something, it's really important to have it defined what it is. Also make it difficult. So routine, regular, reliable orgasm every time is really difficult for women. So you might as well put that in there so that they can always feel uncertain and, you know, always want a new product or whatever. So what is sex is a question. What is sexual function that dysfunction is? So you look it up in the DSM, and it'll say lack of desire. Well, lack of desire for what? Lack of desire for hugging, kissing, licking, smelling, rolling around, or lack of desire for penetration of the vagina. I mean, what is the problem? How often do you not have to have an orgasm before you have an orgasm problem? Once? I mean, the ads for Viagra would say having any kind of sexual episodes without a full hard erection is something you don't want to have. There are lots of things you can do with a soft penis. You don't have to have a hard penis to do everything all the time. And as you get older, the less hard is actually an advantage in certain ways. God forbid. Now we've got these 65-year-old men with their Viagra erections. No wonder the lubes are selling out down in Walgreens. Nobody's learned what to do with a soft penis. I used to say to men, do you know you can actually ejaculate with a soft penis? No, no, no. Well, they said, you don't have one, you don't know, it can't be done. I knew it can be done, but you have to want it to be done, like so many things. Anal pleasure, you know, low intensity stuff that goes on forever and never gets high enough for orgasm. There's so many ways you can have pleasure with the body, but you have to learn them, and there's no place to learn them. Yeah? I see a nod. That makes me feel good. Yes?
I had a question. You mentioned that in the field of neuroscience, there's been a lot of money and a lot of attention given to that type of scientific discovery. And I was wondering if you thought personally that our neuroscience and sexuality totally parallel, mutually exclusive topics, and they don't intersect at all for the gains in sexuality at all? Or, you know, have you come across anything, or do you feel that neuroscience has provided positive input for sexuality?
Can you give an example?
I was thinking more along the lines of when you talked about being able to know that stimulus input into the genital fluids can be found in the brain. And then you said, you know, obviously it can, we always, what's the big deal, what do we know? But is there any way that knowing what goes on in the brain and knowing the anatomical structures in the brain, what they have to do with stimulus input, can that be a positive thing? Can that help us learn more about sex in this, like, in a dancing fashion, and, you know, learning from other people? Is science helpful at all in that aspect?
Only metaphorically.
Could you please
So repeat the question.
Sorry.
No, I think the question, it goes to the heart, and it's a question I've been asked 1,000 times in different ways. Usually what people say, aren't drugs helpful at all? Don't drugs help anybody? What is your problem? So her question was neuroscience. Isn't there anything in neuroscience that's teaching us some things about sexuality that are helpful for a true understanding or a better sex life, whatever? And my sense is no. I think that like a lot of things, neuroscience talk about sex is clean talk. It's about, you know, cells and sections of the brain, and, you know, oh, here's what the amygdala is doing, and here's whatever. And so you can write about it, and it allows people to talk about sex. I believe anything that allows people to talk about sex is going to be positive if they just keep it going long enough, if they don't just stop with, you know, and here's what the amygdala is doing. But the actual facts are totally, everything is known. That what I just said about eroticization, none of that came from brain research. None. That came from practice, learning theory, cultural reports, The variations in what people like, that doesn't come from looking at the brain, oh, you're an ear person, you're a nipple person. No. It comes from talking to them and asking them. And then, so you want to say, well, do you want to really put them in an MRI and see if their nipples are bigger in their brain than their ears? Is that really the way you want to spend your money? Is that really important? And so for me, it's not, would anything ever illuminate anything? Eventually, of course, probably, sure. But it's more about the use of the resources and the mystification to the public. So that more and more the public doesn't know that sex is about learning and that, you know, trying things and practicing them. I had patients for decades. You know, I would say, well, have you, you know, they'd say, I hate this, I don't like this doesn't feel good, this doesn't feel like anything. And I'd say, okay, let's sort of review it. So tell me about some of the circumstances where you tried being nude, let's say, during sex, which you say you don't like. Well, I tried it once. Everything is always tried once. People don't have a sense, like my mother, who taught piano for 1,000 years. You don't do anything just once. No matter what you do just once, forget about it, because the first time you do anything, it's so unfamiliar that all you can think about is, oh my God, am I really doing this? This is so unfamiliar. I hate it. Forget that. Throw that one away. Start with the second time and the third. Come back after you've done it 10 times. Tell me what was different about each time. Sex is about paying attention. It's about training your mind to pay attention. If you want to be like a big sexual person. If you don't, God bless you, and who needs it anyway? Right? A lot of people are no good at it and forget about it. They're not body people. They're not, you know, out there showman kind of people. But if you want to do it for some reason, it's about practice, it's about training and a sense of attention to being sensual. Oh, sensual, there's not going to a spa to be sensual. Lying down, taking a bath, paying attention, seeing how hard it is to pay attention to what you feel. Right? Trying to imagine what you look like when you do certain things and how do you feel about that. And, you know, so it's about paying attention and reflecting. The brain is not. Brain research is not going to help us. And nobody's doing research like this. Nobody takes people who feel self-designated, talented sexual people. Right? Tell me what it's all about and compare it with self-designated sexual losers. You know, what is your problem? You know, where is this research? It's like, well, that's not interesting. That's not respectable research. You know, let's see what's going on in the brain when we have clitoral stimulation on the left side versus the right side. Let's see, is there contralateral projection of the clitoris? To, you know, and what is different in the different stages of the menstrual cycle, and then what's going to be different in different ages, and then what's going to be different under the conditions of alcohol or you know, endless research. And I saw all that research, all of those permutations and variations every time a new technology would come in. And what does it look like over the menstrual cycle? And what does it look like during pregnancy? As if anybody used any of that research for any purpose whatsoever. Never. Nothing. The only thing that's worked with HIV has been learning research. How do you re-eroticize things with a condom? A lot of very interesting learning stuff about that kind of thing. Anyway, long answer, I'm sorry. One more. Yes?
I was interested in to what degree is it feasible, kind of from a more activist-oriented standpoint, to try and reclaim the right to have a discourse about sexuality that isn't being almost polluted by these outside medicalizing influences?
Say the front part again. From an activist point of view.
As someone who's, you know, 21 years old, who's just kind of starting out with the idea of activism,
right.
Do you have any tips or information about what's a good way to get started off? Just
Uh-huh. That's a good question. You know, activism is not something a person should do alone. It's not fun, and it's not sustainable. It's hard, and so you tend to give up. So, and everything I've ever done has been from getting a bunch of people together in a room, generally feminist women together in a room, and saying, you know, so what do you think is important? Where is a problem for you? What do you think we ought to work on? And we just keep talking and then reach some kind of a consensus. So there's a lot to learn. So you could either latch yourself on to an organization that already exists, or get a bunch of people together in a room and try to identify what would make your sex life better. What would make sex better in your life? Answer that question. Discuss for half an hour. What would make sex better in your life? What is known about that? What do you wish you knew about that? What could we do about that?
Thank you very much. Dr. Tiefer has there's a petition back there, or a mailing email list.
Yeah, just an email
list. If you would like to be on the email list for further information, please sign your name. I'm sure if you have her book,
take a brochure.
want her to sign, she would do that too.
Oh.
Thank you, everyone.